Og til noget helt andet. Danskerne burde lave en revolution. For selvom vi jo lever i et af de rigeste lande i verden, så kunne vi sagtens få det bedre og gøre resten af verden til et bedre sted. Sådan lyder det fra amerikanske Zack Exley, der er tidligere kampagneleder for demokraten Bernie Sanders. Exley er i disse dage i København inviteret den danske fagbevægelse. Han er også en af forfatterne bag bogen her. Man kan se bag ved mig, Rules for Revolutionaries. Og da jeg i studiet tidligere spurgte jeg ham, hvad den første regel for revolutionære så er.
Well, the first rule that we have in the book actually is you won't get a revolution if you don't ask for one. And you know, Bernie talked about a political revolution, and that was seemed like a totally crazy thing for an American politician to say. It sounded radical, and then it turned out it brought out millions and millions of people to support him. And you know, he lost, but he went from 3% in the polls, nobody knowing who he was outside of his home state, to almost winning the nomination. And more than anything, it was powered by him actually coming out with a really big vision, really bold policies that everybody thought was unacceptable to talk about. Of course, it's everything that you already have in Denmark, you know, free education, healthcare, but it was a really big step to the left, and it brought out tons of people, ordinary people, people from all across the political spectrum, and it wouldn't have happened if he hadn't said it.
Yeah, and you just mentioned that some of what he said we already have here in Denmark, and I know you're here because you're invited by some of the Danish unions, but I also want to ask you, what can Danish unions, who are really an integrated part of the Danish political, economic elite, who've seen many of these ideas become real, what can they learn from you?
Yeah, well, it seems like there's this great tradition in Denmark of learning from these big, huge, wacky presidential campaigns that we have. And so people came over after the Obama campaign. I wish that in the U.S. we would learn our own lessons, you know, as well. But I feel like one thing that, because I actually started out as a labor organizer in America. That was my first job. And, you know, I come from a labor movement that went from almost 40% union membership to private sector, we're almost down to 6%. So I come from a labor movement that just committed suicide, basically. And so part of what I've been talking about is sort of a warning, you know, from our past and from maybe Denmark's future, you know, because when a labor movement stops fighting for something massively better than what you have today, I think it's universal all around the world. When that happens, the labor movement goes into decline. And I know that it doesn't feel that way here, but that's been one of the things that I've kind of, I'm not issuing a warning, I'm not that arrogant, but I'm asking people, what do you think? You know, are you going to be able to organize by just saying, hey, the status quo is so great here, you know, let's stick with it. And I don't think that works for organizing.
Okay, so maybe this is what I hear you speaking to the Danish unions now, because in some ways they're so close to political power that some people see them as close to the status quo. But try and just explain, why is a movement so important if you have it pretty good? What's so important about movement?
Well, I mean, do we have it pretty good? I mean, I know that you know, in Denmark you might have it better than any other country in the world, right? Which is amazing. But is this really what human life is supposed to be about? You know, that, you know, even somebody in a nice, cool, professional job in Copenhagen, and they come to their, you know, beautiful cubicle. I can only imagine how cool they are compared to ours. And you have healthcare, but is that really what life's about? Is clocking in to a job and doing it all day long? I mean, we used to dream, the labor movement, the social democratic movement used to dream of something so much better. And to me, what is terrible right now is that the people that are talking about a future where we almost don't have to work, where we can really just spend time with taking care of our families and creating and, you know, learning, the people talking about that are industrialists in Silicon Valley, not labor union leaders, not social movement leaders. And that's nuts, and I think we need to turn that around.
I know you've studied Danish society some, and that also appears from what you're saying. And so you also know that a lot of Danish society historically has been organized around popular movements. Many layers of Danish society have come into existence that way. Nonetheless, some researchers see that there's this growing sense of disconnect among people, among the citizens, among all of the Danes who are in this society to some extent created by movements. What's your response to that problem, the sense of disconnect, of distance to power?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think that the reason for that disengagement all over the world, wherever it's happening, is the same. It's because we're not talking about something that's going to be way better for people. And I think that, you know, maybe in the past it was the very high up elite that fell out of touch with the people. But today it's this professional class, of which I'm a member of, you know, the top 20% or maybe the top 40% in some societies. And we are falling out of touch with the bottom 80% or 60%. And I don't think that even in Denmark, and I've had some conversations that have given me this impression that the people, you know, in the bottom 40, 50% of income earners, they're not so excited about how things are going. It's not that they have terrible, awful lives, but they had an idea that their children would be living a much better, more exciting life than them. Their children would get a much better education than them. They would have access to opportunities for travel and cool jobs with those cool cubicles, and they're not getting those opportunities. It's the exact same story in America, just a lot worse. And I think that's the reason for the disengagement, and it's also the reason for the turn to the right.
And you mentioned the turn to the right, and when I think about the word movement and think about political leaders who've created this sense of a movement around them, at least in Europe, I don't really see social democrat leaders do that so much, which is probably how you describe Bernie Sanders. I see France's Emmanuel Macron calling his party a movement. I see the five-star movement in Italy, who will probably play a big role in the coming election, creating the sense of something else, that there's a movement going on. Could it be that the social democratic message, which historically, yes, has come out of movements, just isn't any longer, sort of doesn't appeal as much to enough people that it can create this energy that creates a movement?
Right. Well, but I think that the original social democratic message would still appeal, and because it used to be that the social democratic tradition talked about a world where all of the people really controlled their means of making a living, and where we would, you know, what we would be doing today, according to their old dream, is using all this incredible technology to make it so that we almost didn't have to think about making a living. And that's real. It might sound wacky, but the people who are creating our technology and our economy today are talking about that in a very real way. They're talking about eliminating, you know, most of our jobs in the coming couple of decades. So we should be talking about that. The old social democratic tradition would be talking today about how we create a massively better society. I think that movements like Macron's and the five-star movement are fizzling out. I mean, it's too early to say that with Macron, but I think that they also don't have that vision of something radically better for the people, and so it's more of just a vote against corruption. But I all over the world, including in America especially, the hard right, they're the movement that has a big vision. It's a terrible, you know, evil vision, in my opinion. Donald Trump campaigned on deporting 12 million immigrants, right? Just rounding up 12 million people and moving them out of the country, organizing a deportation force for this, breaking all kinds of international laws and American laws. It was terrible, but it was a big vision. So if you're somebody that doesn't like immigrants, if you're going to fall prey to that kind of hatred and incitement, then he was offering a really big solution. And the majority of Americans didn't vote for that, but he was able to mobilize a significant minority that allowed him to become president.
So let's just end off then. You say there's a need for large visions, dreams that are more ambitious than what we have now. So what's your advice for people here in Denmark who would like to present alternative visions?
Well, one thing that I keep running by people here, everybody that I've been meeting, is why can't Denmark be the first country that builds a truly zero-carbon economy? This is something that we all know we need to do. And I saw some study the other day that showed that even somebody that's trying their best to be perfectly ecological in Denmark is still consuming, you know, 2.5 times of the Earth's resources. In other words, if everybody in the world lived that way. So even Denmark, which is so far ahead, isn't doing enough. And learning about the politics here and seeing how closely connected everybody is, and how you're able to talk about things even as hard as immigration in a pretty civil way in Denmark, couldn't Denmark be the country that does that? And think about all the work it would take and all of the invention and all of the building to make that a reality here. That's the kind of thing that could pull up people from the bottom 50% of income earners and workers that are maybe aspiring to better jobs and bigger, more education. That kind of project could fulfill those old dreams for everybody in Denmark. We're nowhere near doing that in the U.S. Maybe you guys could do it.
Thanks for the tip. We'll pass it on. Thank you so much for coming.
You.
Ja, det var et bud på, hvad man kunne drømme om i nat. Der er sikkert mange.